The dress was finished, and it hung on the back of the door where the hook usually held my winter shawl. Navy, pressed so flat it looked like water. I was 19, and I was getting married in the morning, and I thought my mother had called me into that room to bless me. The lamp was low. Her needle went in and out of a hem that was already done, in and out of nothing, and she would not look at me. I remember the smell of the pressing cloth still warm on the table. I remember my own hands, cold. Then she said, "Sit down. There's something you have to know before tomorrow." And she stopped. "My name is Miriam. I grew up in a small Amish settlement in Adams County, Indiana, and I did not leave until I was 30. This channel is where I tell the things we were taught to carry in silence, quietly, honestly, the way I wish someone had told them to me. If you have ever sat across from someone who loved you and heard them say something that changed how you saw your whole life, then you already understand why I am here, and I would be glad to have you stay. Subscribe if you want to sit at this table with me. And before I go on, I want to ask you one thing, and I mean it gently. What is the truest thing your mother ever told you that you wish, even now, she had softened? Leave it below. I read every word. I had watched that dress take shape for 3 weeks, and I had loved it. My mother cut it on the kitchen floor with the shears that had cut every dress I ever wore, and she pinned it while I stood on a stool and held my breath so the fit would come out true. It was the finest thing I would ever own. That evening it hung on the door, and the door was closed, and our door was never closed. That was the first wrong thing. In our house, a closed door meant grief, or sickness, or a bishop's visit. It did not mean a mother and her daughter alone with a lamp. She was sitting in the low chair by the window with her sewing basket in her lap. There was nothing left to sew. The hem was set, the pleats were pressed, the little hooks were fastened up the front the way they should be, but she kept the needle moving anyway, in and out of the fold, the way a woman's hands keep busy when her mouth is deciding whether to speak. I sat down on the edge of the bed because there was nowhere else, and I waited, and the treadle machine in the corner sat still and dark, and the only sound in the whole house was that needle. I want you to understand what I expected. I expected warmth. I thought this was the moment mothers spoke of the good things, that she would take my face in her hands and tell me tomorrow would be beautiful, that Eli was a steady man, that a home of my own was a gift. Other girls came back from these last nights with soft eyes. They did not say what was spoken, because it was not spoken of, but they seemed lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from them and named a blessing. I thought I was about to be given that same blessing. I leaned toward it like a plant leans at a window. Eli was not a cruel man. I want to say that here, at the start, before you decide anything about him, because none of what I am about to tell you was his doing. He was a quiet farmer 2 districts over, older than me by 6 years, chosen for me the way most of us were chosen, by the sense of the families, by land that lay well together, by the plain arithmetic of who was of age. I did not love him. I did not love him. He was a fact of my life, the way weather is a fact, and I had made my peace with facts long before that night. My heart was calm going into that room. That is the part I think about most now. The lamp needed trimming. The flame had begun to smoke a little at the top. throwing a thin black thread up toward the ceiling, and my mother reached over and turned the wick down without looking, an old habit, a thing her hands knew. I watched her do it. Her hands were beautiful. They were rough across the knuckles from lye and cold water and 40 years of work, but they moved with a gentleness that had rocked 6 children and washed the dead and shelled more peas than I could count. Those hands had only ever been kind to me. I keep telling you about her hands because I need you to hold them in your mind for what comes later. She still had not looked at me. She looked at the window, though there was nothing out there but the dark shape of the barn and one lit square from the neighbor's kitchen far across the field. I remember thinking that, whatever she had to say, it must be hard, because my mother was not a woman who struggled for words. She ran the house. She spoke plainly to the deacon when she had to, and here she was, threading a needle through a finished hem, unable to begin. A cold started up in my stomach, small, the size of a coin. Something was wrong, and I did not yet have a name for it. I almost spoke first. I almost said, "Mem, it's all right, whatever it is." I have gone back to that moment 1,000 times and wished I had, because I think if I had spoken she might have lost her nerve, and the words might have died in her, and I would have gone into my marriage the way the other girls seemed to, soft-eyed, unknowing, allowed to hope. But I didn't speak. I was a good daughter, and a good daughter waits. So I folded my cold hands in my lap, and I waited, and the needle went still, and she laid it down on the arm of the chair. Then she turned and looked at me for the first time since I'd come into the room, and I saw something in my mother's face that I had never seen there in 19 years. Not sorrow, not fear, but something worse. Something I could not read until I was much older and had worn it on my own face. She looked at me the way you look at someone you are about to hand a heavy thing to, knowing they are too young to carry it, and knowing there is no one else to give it to. "Sit up straight," she said, though I was already sitting straight, and she set the sewing basket on the floor. She did not raise her voice. That is the thing I need you to hear first, because when people imagine a hard truth being handed down, they imagine anger, or weeping, or a warning hissed in the dark. It was none of that. My mother spoke the way she read scripture at the table on a Sunday, evenly, without heat, each word set down in its place like a stone in a wall. She said, "Tomorrow you will belong to Eli's house, and there are things a wife is and things a wife is not, and it is better you know them from me tonight than learn them the hard way in the morning." And then she began to tell me what I was. "A wife keeps still," she said, "not silent as in never speaking, but still as in never pushing. A wife carries what she is given and does not ask why it is heavy. When your husband decides a thing, the deciding is done, and your part is not to weigh it, but to help it come true." She said this plainly, the way you would teach a girl to bank a fire or set bread to rise. And here is the strange part, the part that unsettled me even then. Her hands, those beautiful, kind hands, stayed folded and gentle in her lap the whole time she spoke, while her mouth laid down one hard stone after another. I sat very still, and I felt each thing she said land somewhere inside me and take something with it. I had not known, until she named them, that I had wanted those things at all. I had never once thought I would decide the running of a house, But hearing that I would not, I felt a small door close that I had not known was open. I had never expected to be asked my opinion on the fields or the money or the church, but hearing plainly that my opinion would not be sought, something in me went quiet that had never made a sound before. That is how it is with a cage. You do not feel the bars until someone tells you they are there. She told me a wife does not let her face show her feeling, that a husband should never have to guess whether his wife is troubled, because a troubled face is a burden laid on a man who already carries enough. She told me that longing was a thing to be worked out of yourself the way you work a stain out of cloth, with hot water and patience and never any complaint. She told me that the Lord had made the woman to be a help, and that help meant fitting yourself to the shape of what was needed, again and again, until you no longer remembered you had ever had another shape. I remember I nodded. I did not know what else to do. My whole life had trained me to nod. Then something happened that changed the whole room, though nothing in it moved. In the middle of a sentence about how a wife learns to want less, my mother's voice caught, just slightly, just for a breath, and she said, "My own mother told me the very same, the night before I married your father, in the house on the Burn Road." She said it almost by accident, the way a thing slips out that you had not meant to give. And then she pressed her lips together and went on. But I had heard it, and the room was suddenly not empty anymore. Because if her mother had said these words to her, then someone had said them to her mother, in some other lamplit room, on some other last night, going back and back. All at once I felt them there with us, women I had never met, women in the ground now, grandmothers and great-grandmothers, each one sitting where I sat, each one handed the same stones by the same gentle hands, each one nodding the way I was nodding. The room felt crowded. I understand now it was only the two of us and a low lamp. But that night I could have sworn we were surrounded, and I asked myself the question I could not ask out loud. If these words had been given to my mother, and they had hurt her, and I could hear now, under the flatness of her voice, that they had hurt her, that the flatness itself was the scar, then why was she handing them to me? Why would a woman pass along the very weight that had bent her own back? I looked at her folded hands, and I could not make sense of it. I thought, for one terrible moment, that she must not love me. I know better now, but I did not know better then, and the not knowing sat in my chest like a swallowed stone. She was not finished. I could tell by the way she paused and drew a breath and looked, once, at the dress hanging on the door, as though she needed to gather herself for what came next. Everything up to then had been the lesson every wife was given. Everything up to then I might have carried into my marriage and lived with, the way my mother had, the way the women in the ground had. But there was one more thing she meant to say, and she had saved it for last, and I could see her deciding to say it. The lamp flame steadied. The house was so quiet I could hear my own breath. And she opened her mouth to tell me the truth. I have spent my whole life wishing she had kept. She said, "Do not go into that house hoping he will love you. Hope is the thing that will break you. Expect nothing from him, and you will not be disappointed. And a woman who is not disappointed can last a whole life." That was it. That was the whole of it. She did not say it cruelly. She said it the way you would tell a child to dress warm because the winter was long, out of care, out of the only kind of care she had left to give, and I have carried those words for the rest of my days. I want you to understand why that sentence did what it did. Everything else she had told me that night was about what I would do, how I would keep still, how I would help, how I would fit myself to the shape of the house. I could do things. I had always been able to do things, but this was different. This was about what I would be allowed to want, and the answer was nothing. She had reached past all my doing and put her hand on the one thing I had been quietly holding without ever saying it aloud, the small, stubborn hope that somewhere in that marriage there might be love, that Eli might come to see me, that I might be someone's and not just something's. And she took it out of my hands, gently, on purpose, for my own good. Here is the part I have never been able to explain to anyone who did not come from where I came from. I would have given anything, in that moment, for her to lie to me. I wanted her to take my face in her hands and say, "He will love you, and you will be happy, and tomorrow will be beautiful," even if it was not true, even if she knew it was not true. I wanted the lie the other girls seemed to have been given. I wanted to walk into my wedding, soft-eyed and foolish and full of hope, and let the hope carry me as far as it could before it broke, because at least I would have had it. Instead, she gave me the truth, and the truth was a door closing while I was still inside the room. The dress on the back of the door did not look like a dress anymore. I remember lifting my eyes to it and seeing it plainly for what it was, a shape hanging there in the dark, empty, waiting to be filled by a girl who would walk into it hoping for nothing. It looked like a thing you would lay someone out in. I know that is a hard thing to say about a wedding dress, but that is what I saw. Navy, pressed flat as still water, and empty, and waiting. I did not cry. I think I was too far past crying. I just looked at it, and my mother looked at me, and neither of us said one word more. I do not remember going to bed. The next thing I remember is the gray light of morning and the sounds of the house waking around me, my sisters' voices, the stove door, the ordinary racket of an ordinary day pretending it was not the day it was. And then the wedding came, and it came too fast, the way a thing you dread always comes faster than a thing you long for. There were the benches and the singing, and the long plain service, and Eli standing beside me in his good coat, and the whole district there to see us joined. And under all of it, under every word the bishop spoke, I heard my mother's voice. Expect nothing. Hope is the thing that will break you. It ran beneath the vows like water runs under ice. I said what I was supposed to say. I meant to mean it, but I stood there hollowed out, going through the shape of a wedding, with the hope already gone out of me, and I thought no one could see it. I thought I had learned my mother's lesson well enough to keep it off my face. Then, somewhere in the middle of it all, I looked across at her, sitting with the women, watching her daughter Mary, and I saw that her face was doing the very thing she had told me a wife's face must never do. It was showing everything. She was looking at me the way you look at someone walking a road you have already walked, knowing every stone in it, unable to call out. And in that one look I understood a thing that has never left me. I was not looking at my mother. I was looking at myself. I was looking at what I would become, a woman who had once sat where I was sitting, who had once hoped, who had once had the hope taken from her by gentle hands on a last night, and who had lasted, exactly as promised, a whole long life on nothing. She had not lied to me because she did not know how to give me anything she had not been given. You cannot hand a daughter a hope you do not own. She gave me the only thing she had. She gave me her own survival and called it love, and maybe it was. That night, after the day was done and the guests were gone, I stood at the threshold of the room that was now mine and Eli's, my hand on the cold frame of the door, and I did not go in for a long moment. I stood there and I felt the whole weight of the women behind me, all of them, going back and back, every one who had stood at a door like this with nothing in her hands. Then I went in, and the door closed, the way our doors were never closed, except when they were. It would take me 11 years to understand what my mother had truly given me that night, and it would take a girl I had not yet met to make me understand it. 11 years is a long time to live on nothing, and I did it, exactly the way I was told I could. Eli was not unkind to me. He was steady and quiet and fair, and he never raised his hand or his voice, and if you had asked anyone in the district, they would have said I had a good marriage, and by the measure we were taught, I did. But I had gone into that house expecting nothing, and I got what I expected, and the two of us lived side by side for over a decade, like two people sharing a fence line, civil, respectful, never once meeting in the middle. I had done what my mother said. I had not been disappointed, and I had also not, in all that time, been truly glad. There is a difference. It took me years to learn the difference. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to make Eli the villain of this, and he was not. The thing that hollowed out my marriage was not a man. It was a sentence, handed down a long line of lamplit rooms that told two people never to hope for each other, so that neither of us ever reached. He had been given his own version of that night, I am sure of it now. Some father or grandfather teaching a boy that a wife was a help and a house was a duty and softness was a thing you grew out of. We were both obeying instructions we had never chosen. We were both walking roads worn smooth by the feet of people in the ground. The system did not need a monster. It only needed us to do as we were taught, and we did. My mother passed the winter I turned 29. I sat with her at the end, and I held those hands, still beautiful, thinner now, and I found I could not stay angry at her the way I had been for so long. Because in going through her things afterward, I found there was no photograph of her wedding. Of course there was not. We did not keep such things. But I found her own mother's sewing basket, the very one, and I understood that she had sat in a low chair by a lamp on her own last night and been handed the same stones by the same kind of hands, and had carried them, and had never once had the words to set them down. She did not give me the truth to wound me. She gave it to me because it was the only inheritance she had, and a mother gives what she has. I did not leave all at once. Leaving is never the clean thing people outside imagine. But something had started to loosen in me after she died, some thread pulling free, and over the next while the life I had lived without hope became a thing I could no longer make myself live. I left the settlement in Adams County when I was 30, and I will not pretend the years after were easy, because they were not. But that is a different story than the one I came to tell you. The story I came to tell you did not truly end until a few years later. in a plain kitchen that was not mine, when a young woman I had come to know sat across from me the night before her own wedding. She was marrying a boy she was not sure of, in a life she had not quite chosen, and she looked at me the way I must have looked at my mother, hoping I would say the thing that would make the mourning bearable. And she asked me. She said, "You were married. What do I need to know before tomorrow?" And I felt the words rise in me. I felt them come up out of some deep, worn groove, ready and waiting, the whole inheritance sitting right there behind my teeth. Expect nothing. Hope is the thing that will break you. They were already in my mouth. My mother's voice, and her mother's, and all the women in the ground, leaning forward to speak through me one more time. And I stopped. I sat there with those hands of mine that had grown to look so much like my mother's, folded on a stranger's table, and I did not say it. It would have been so easy to say it. It was the truest thing I knew, and it had kept me alive, and there is a terrible comfort in handing down the exact weight you were handed, because then at least you were not the only one who carried it. But I looked at that girl's face, still soft, still hoping, and I could not do to her what had been done to me. I would not be another lamp in another dark room, closing a door inside a young woman before her life had even begun. So I told her something else. I said, hope anyway. I said it might not go the way she dreamed, and I would not lie to her about that, because I had been lied to by silence my whole life, and I would not add to it. But I told her that the hoping was hers, that no one had the right to take it out of her hands the night before, not her mother, not her church, not me, not anyone. I told her to walk into that house wanting more than she was told to want, and to keep wanting it, because the wanting was not the thing that would break her. The wanting was the last part of her that was still free, and I watched something come up in her face that I had not seen on a bride in my whole life, and it was not soft-eyed foolishness. It was permission. I do not wish any more that my mother had lied to me. I used to for years, with everything in me, but I understand now that she could not give me a hope she had never been allowed to keep. You cannot hand down what was taken from you before you were grown. What I wish is different and quieter, and it is this. I wish my mother had been free enough to hope, so that she would have had some to spare for me. That is the whole of it. If you are watching this and someone you loved once handed you the hard truth too soon and closed a door in you before you knew you had a door, I want you to know that you are not broken, and neither were they. The two of you were standing in a long line, in the dark, passing down the only thing you had. But a line can end. It ended in a stranger's kitchen, with a girl I chose not to wound. It can end with you. If any of this found something in you tonight, tell me below what you wish had been softened for you, and stay a while with the rest of us who are learning, late, to hope anyway.